We are less than 3 weeks away from the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, and my excitement is getting pretty crazy right now. But I did say I was going to take a look at the life of the original Switch year by year. I already did it 2017, I recommend checking that out if you haven't yet. And today we're going to talk about 2018, which was a much slower year overall compared to 2017, but I think there was still a lot of cool stuff. So first, let's talk about the presentations that Nintendo held in 2018. It started with a very unusual thing for Nintendo now, which was a Nintendo Direct Mini in 2018 in January, right at the beginning of the year. And even though it was called the Direct Mini, there is a lot of stuff here that was actually really cool. So Nintendo announced Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze was coming to the Switch, and that was really awesome. There was a Super Mario Odyssey free update with Luigi's Balloon World, which was awesome too. I actually really loved that update. I already talked about Mario Odyssey in the last video, but this update was super cool because you could hide balloons anywhere in the worlds of Mario Odyssey and for other people to find. And I felt really proud of my skills in that game, so it was really fun like fighting hidden spots to hide balloons and like seeing that no one was finding them for days on end. That was really cool. So that was a very nice update. They announced Mario Tennis Aces here, I believe. Mario sports games on the Switch have been kind of but Mario Tennis Aces is probably the best one, so that was a cool announcement. The World Ends With You from the DS was announced to be coming to the Switch. I know it wasn't an amazing conversion, but people love that game, so it's really cool to see it announced. We got DLC for Mario Plus Rabbids, a Kingdom Battle with Donkey Kong joining the fray. That was a very cool thing to see as well. And we got Dark Souls Remastered as a final announcement, which was also awesome. I think the problem with this one, I believe it came later to the Switch compared to other platforms, so it made it a little iffy, but people love Dark Souls, and it was really cool to get it on the Switch. I'm surprised none of the other games ever came, though. Oh, and also Celeste was in this game, in this Direct, which is really cool. I mean, I haven't played it, but I've heard super good things about Celeste, so this is a pretty big announcement. Like this was a presentation that lasted less than 20 minutes, and it was packed with really cool stuff. Like I feel like in previous years, this would make a phone direct almost. Like this would make a good phone direct, and this was a mini, so that was pretty impactful stuff. Just a couple of months later, though, we had our first major Nintendo Direct of the year in March, and this one was very big. So there was a lot of stuff here. I think the most important thing people will probably take away from it is that Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was announced here. Just teased. There wasn't really much to it, but it was cool to reveal that they revealed that the Inklings from Splatoon were there, and it was just the beginning of this cycle of really exciting reveals for Smash Brothers throughout the next few years. There was a lot more though. Captain Toad was ported, was announced to be coming from the Wii U to the Switch. A Splatoon 2 Octo expansion was announced. That was huge as well. I already did a video on Splatoon as a series, and I'll talk about it more in a little bit. But Octo expansion is an awesome, awesome DLC edition, and I highly recommend it if you haven't played it yet, but I'll talk about that in a bit. There was Okami HD, which was also a very good game that was really nice to finally get on the Switch. Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy was a big announcement because it was once a Sony exclusive series, so it coming to the Switch was also very cool. And Undertale was there. I've never played Undertale, but I know people absolutely adore that game. So yeah, major announcement there. After that, we had the first Nindies Showcase of the year, and I don't really care that much for the Nindies Showcases, but there was a game here that I actually did get and really enjoyed, which is called Garage. This isn't a very long game. I beat it in one day, but that is actually a good thing because I played this game for hours on end that day. I just played it until I finished it, and I had a really good time doing it. So this is a pretty good announcement. I really liked seeing it and playing it. So if you haven't checked that one out yet, definitely do that. Next up, we have the E3 Direct for 2018, and this one was a little strange. So in between these directs here, outside of the main directs, Pokemon, the Pokemon Company did announce Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. That was shown here for a second, but not in a very interesting way. However, they did announce Fire Emblem Three Houses here with a proper trailer, and I think a name was already announced. And it will only come the following year, but I know Fire Emblem Three Houses has a huge fan base, and it really propelled the franchise to new heights. So it was a very, very exciting announcement in retrospect, especially, but in general, it was a very good announcement. There was DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 2 with Torn of the Golden Country. This is actually, it is DLC, but it is also sold as its standalone expansion because it's such a big adventure still. So that was also a very big announcement, and people love Torn of the Golden Country, so it's a good announcement to have, obviously. Fortnite was announced here, so this was also huge because Fortnite, I believe the mode everyone knows now, the Battle Royale, launched in 2017 originally, and it was huge. It was already blowing up at this point. And it coming to the Switch was huge news. I remember people generally thought that it was like, oh, this is so late for this to happen. Like, no one's going to care anymore. And now here we are 7 years later, and Fortnite's still one of the biggest things in the world. It's just kept growing, and it's still supported on the Switch, which is pretty impressive considering how weak the Switch is compared to other platforms. So yeah, Fortnite was a big announcement then, and unlike some people expected, it kept being huge for years to come. It just keeps growing. It is insane. Hollow Knight was here as well. Obviously, a fan favorite indie game. People love Hollow Knight. Still waiting for Silksong, but well, it'll come eventually. The problem with this big thing is that all of these announcements, there's not a lot of them for one thing, and they all took the span of like 15 minutes or so, because the vast majority of this presentation was dedicated to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, it was incredibly exciting if you like Super Smash Bros. There is so much stuff here. This is when they revealed that everyone is here, like every character from past games made an appearance, including DLC characters. Everything was here from the start. I believe this is also when they introduced Ridley, which was a completely new character for Smash Brothers. Like, there was so much stuff in Smash Ultimate that was announced here. Like, it was such a huge presentation. It's so exciting the way it was presented. The way they showed the characters gradually to make you realize, like, holy heck, they're bringing back everyone. Like, there was so much cool stuff about Smash Brothers here. But it was like 25 minutes of just Smash Brothers stuff. It was a lot. So I think that made this direct a little underwhelming because it just spent so much time on one game. As cool as that game is, that was a long period just focused on that one game. So that was a little unfortunate. I think that kind of ruined the presentation a little bit in a way, especially if you're not a Smash Brothers fan. But it was still pretty cool. There was a bunch of cool stuff, and I do care about Smash Brothers, even though I don't play the games. There's just a sort of attachment to how it treats video games in general and everything that it incorporates. So seeing all this passion in this presentation is really, really cool. Yeah, I really like this show overall, but I can see how it's very flawed too. Next, we had another Nindies showcase. I still didn't really care for this one very much. However, there were a couple more games that stand out to me. Bastion is a big one. I believe I played this one on PC many years ago, but it's from, what are they called? I don't remember their names. Supergiant? I think it's Supergiant. It's the same developers of games like Hades. And Bastion was one of their earlier titles, and it is also really, really good, really fun. It's not a roguelite like Hades is, it's more of an adventure game, but it's really good. I remember liking it a lot. And I mean, playing it on the Switch, why not? It's a good idea. Hyper Light Drifter was also here. I remember hearing good things about that one. I believe it even has a sequel. I haven't played it though. And then there was Untitled Goose Game, which was a very meme game that people talked about for a long time. And yeah, that was a good announcement as well. I also still haven't played it, but I know it's very popular and very loved by people. So yeah, some cool indie announcements there as well. Finally, we have the last Nintendo Direct of the year in September, and it was also pretty good. In this one, we got the first trailer for Luigi's Mansion 3, which was really cool to me because I love Luigi's Mansion 2. Like, I know that's the least liked of the Luigi's Mansion games, but for me, that was the only one I had played at this point. And I was super excited to see Luigi's Mansion 3. It looked pretty rough compared to the final product. Like, this was over a year before the game came out, and the textures and the lighting in this first trailer are not that impressive. Like, the next time we saw this game, it had leveled up a lot, but it was just cool to see this announcement at all. I was super excited for it. Other big announcements here, we had a bunch of Final Fantasy classic games coming to the Switch, which was really cool to see. Final Fantasy 12 was announced to be coming the following year, and then we had announcements for Final Fantasy 7, 9, and 10, plus 10 Part 2 in the HD sort of remastered collection. All were coming to the Switch at some point in the future. Like, that is a lot of Final Fantasy games, and that's not even covering some of the more spin-off titles like Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition HD was coming to the Switch. Chocobo Mystery Dungeon or something like that. And Crystal Chronicles was also announced. So there was a lot of Final Fantasy classic stuff being brought to the Switch, announced in this direct, and that was really cool to see because, you know, Final Fantasy is such a huge franchise. So that was a pretty big series of announcements there. We had things like Katamari Damacy being brought to the Switch as well, another classic game. And then in terms of actual new games, we had Yoshi's Crafted World shown with the title for the first time, I believe, here. You know, got a few more details on that. I know that game turned out kind of whatever, but it was cool to see. And we got our first teaser for Animal Crossing on the Switch, which was supposed to come 2019 when it was first teased, but as we will later find out, it actually released in 2020, and thank goodness, because a lot of people needed it that year. One last thing to mention here is that this is when Nintendo finally launched the Nintendo Switch Online service. So if you remember, in January 2017, they announced that there was going to be a paid online service for the Nintendo Switch, and it was supposed to launch in September 2017, and you'd be able to play it for free until then. But then it ended up lasting an extra year, and Switch Online only launched in September 2018. And it was detailed here with a bunch of things, including, of course, the price, but also the launch of the NES games. So at launch, the Switch Online service came with 20 games for the NES that you could play at no additional cost, and you could play them with online multiplayer. And that is pretty big. Like, that was the first time Nintendo had actually incorporated multiplayer into these classic games. It's, you know, more of an emulator thing where, like, the emulator has online functionality built in, and it just acts as if you have two controllers. But still, that's amazing to have for a lot of games. Maybe not so much on the NES, but definitely with later editions. Either way, having these 23 games and knowing that more games would be added every now and then in the future, that was a very cool announcement, and considering Switch Online only costs $20 a year, that was a very reasonable price. Plus, on top of that, you had, you know, save data cloud, so your saves would finally be backed up to the cloud in case your Switch breaks, you can always restore them. And you have perks like how they announced the Nintendo Switch Online NES controllers that you could use to play those NES games. So yeah, lot of cool stuff, I think, for the NES Online, the Switch Online service, you know, that launched here. It was tame. I think people just didn't want to pay for it, which is completely understandable, especially considering the online service wasn't that great on the Switch at this point. But over time, it definitely improved, and they've added a lot more games. So I think, you know, in retrospect, this is a fairly cool announcement, even though it was very slow, I guess, when you look back on it and consider how much Nintendo could have offered from the beginning. But that's about it in terms of presentations from Nintendo in 2018. Definitely a lot of cool stuff was announced and shown in these presentations, but I feel like when we turn to the games, things feel a little bit more slow. I think there were a lot of ports during this year, a lot of smaller games, that made this a bit of an underwhelming year for the Switch until you get to Smash Bros. Ultimate at the end. And I can't really dive too deep into that because I don't have that game. But there is a lot of cool stuff, in my opinion, that launched on the Switch in 2018. And that, of course, starts with Bayonetta 1 and 2 being ported. They were not announced in the Direct, whether it was in 2017 or 2018. they came out very early in the year, and I believe they were announced at the Game Awards in 2017, alongside the announcement of Bayonetta 3. And this was my first experience with these games. I remember when Bayonetta 2 came to the Wii U, and it looked really good, and people really liked it. But I didn't have a Wii U at the time, so when these games came to the Switch, I finally bought them, and they were awesome. Bayonetta 1 is a bit more, I don't know. I feel like it was amazing. I don't want to make Bayonetta 1 seem less good, even though it is. But like, it doesn't mean it's not worth playing. It absolutely is. I just think Bayonetta 2 is a very good evolution of Bayonetta 1. It feels a little bit more colorful. The graphics are just better overall. It runs a bit better, like it's more optimized. I think everything about Bayonetta 2 just feels better compared to Bayonetta 1. But that's not to say Bayonetta 1 isn't amazing, because it is. I know it's hard to look at these games as anything else. Like, you kind of just look at the main character and kind of assume it's one of those games for those kinds of people that like, I guess, looking at women like that. But the actual action in this game is absolutely fantastic. These are incredibly action-packed games. You feel so powerful because every battle is against these freaking giant monsters that just take up so much of the screen, and you can't imagine how, an actual person would be able to win in that sort of fight. But you feel so powerful in these games. The chains you can pull off with moves are really impressive. It's really worth it to learn all the controls and everything. There's just so much going on in these games, and they're just so much fun. They're super fun. There's a lot of secrets to find. I didn't find all of them, definitely. And you kind of get invested in the plot. It's a little mysterious in a way. And yeah, these games are absolutely worth playing, both of them. The fact that they were sold together for $60, incredible deal. For $60, getting these two games, absolutely fantastic. So, highly recommended. Bayonetta 3 also, that came later, but also recommended. Not as good, but definitely recommended. Yeah, all fantastic games. Highly recommend Bayonetta 2. That made a very good start to 2018. The next original game we got was Kirby Star Allies in March or February. I was somewhere around then, and that was also a very good game. Well, okay, it's a game I enjoyed, I should say. I don't think it's amazing. A lot of people don't think it's amazing, but I had a good time with it. I think the big problem with it is that, and I wrote a review for this back in the day. It's really designed around the multiplayer, and it's done in a way that really sacrifices the single player experience, because if you're playing alone, you still need extra characters. They're just controlled by the CPU, and the CPU can be really, really dumb. So it makes the experience way more frustrating than it needs to be playing by yourself. I think it really makes you want to play with someone else, and that's a little bit of a problem. But otherwise, I didn't like the game. I mean, it's a cute Kirby game. Every Kirby game is adorable. It's easygoing most of the time, but there's also a lot of challenge. And I think what's cool about Kirby Star Allies is that they kept updating this game throughout 2018 with a lot more content. They added more characters from previous games, stuff like marks and everything. A lot of cool abilities too that these characters had. I think that made it really fun. And there was a challenge in beating the game with all the different characters, which was, it gave you a lot of things to do, I think. And again, they added a lot to it over time. So I think it really became a very complete package by the end of 2018. Even though it's not like super impressive, I think it's a pretty good game, actually. And one thing I actually remember doing in these games was playing the mini games in Kirby Star Allies with my friends, because I was the only one with a Switch. I specifically remember being at Burger King with three of my friends, and I had the Switch, and I already had four Joy-Con at this point. So yeah, there were the four of us who hurtling around my Switch, playing the mini games in Kirby Star Allies while we were waiting for our order at Burger King. And yeah, that was really fun. Like, that's a fun memory I have with the Switch. And yeah, I really like Kirby Star Allies for those memories as well. The next game that released in 2018, or the next major game, was Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And yes, this is a port from the Wii U, but I have to talk about it. Now, I didn't play this game in 2018. I bought it later on sale, but Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is probably the best 2D platformer just ever. It's interesting. It's interesting because these games, Donkey Kong games, are always advertised by fans as like, oh, these are really challenging, really hard, very difficult. You may not be ready for it or something like that. And I don't like when games are described like that. I'm not very good at video games, and when a game's selling point is how challenging or hard it is, I am automatically turned off by that. Like Dark Souls is a series that I don't care about that much because of it. So I was hesitant to buy this one, but I kept hearing people praise it despite being hard. So when I bought it and I played it, I had this realization that hard games don't have to be frustrating. And that's what makes this such a masterful game to me. Like, it is challenging. There is a lot of challenging stuff here. It requires quick reflexes and, judging the situation somewhat quickly. But it's not unforgiving. Like, you can lose and try again relatively easily. And I think what really makes it special, the thing that I remember feeling playing this game is that it never feels like when you die, it's the game's fault. That is one of the most frustrating things to me in the game is when you're doing your best or you think you're doing your best, and it just feels like the game is working against you, and that's why you're losing. Like the controls don't respond fast enough, or they present you with a situation where it's impossible for you to react in time the first few times, or they keep throwing things at you that are just unexpected and unfair. That never happens in Tropical Freeze. Every challenge in here, it is challenging, but it always feels fair. Not once playing this game did I feel frustrated for dying. Like, it was always completely justified. I completely understood why it happened, and I tried again and I got it. Like, it was challenging, but it was so easy to try again at the same time. I don't know how else to explain it. It is hard, but it's not frustrating. And that is something that at this point, I have never seen any game do. Like, I've never seen a game that was actually hard, but that didn't frustrate me, even once. So yeah, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, absolutely masterful game. Again, probably the best 2D platformer ever. If you haven't played it, if you've been afraid like I was that it's too difficult or something, play it. Like, it'll click. It works. It's amazing. Just give it a shot. It is one of the best games you can ever play. Just absolutely. I know people are upset that it was a full price game after being on the Wii U for a much lower price. It that, in my opinion, that doesn't really matter. This is one of the best games you can play. Could it have been cheaper? Probably, yeah, of course it could have. But it's worth $60. It's still worth $60. It's an amazing game. Buy it, play it, love it. You're going to. I guarantee it. Other games in 2018 included Mario Tennis Aces. I don't want to spend too much time on this one. It is a Mario Sports game. It is probably the best Mario Sports game on the Switch. Even though it's not necessarily my favorite series, I was really excited for Mario Strikers later on. Kind of ended up being a disappointment. But Mario Tennis Aces, I actually quite liked. It is a fun gameplay loop. I think people have described it. I saw this video recently where they were describing it as a sort of fighting game almost. And yeah, you build up this meter to pull off a special move, and the special move gives you a very good chance of winning instantly, but it's not guaranteed. There's always the chance that you can protect yourself from one of these special moves and defend it. And there's a very sort of simple dynamic, but it's really rewarding and fun to engage with. Like, it's very fun to play. I'll admit I haven't touched the game in a while, but I remember having a lot of fun with this game. It's definitely very well designed. And out of the Mario sports games on the Switch, it was also the best supported one. They kept adding little things to it, like new outfits for a long time. I think new characters were added with like online tournaments and stuff. Future Mario sports games on the Switch got none of that. It was so much lamer. Um, yeah, so the Mario Tennis Aces was the best Mario sports game on the Switch. It even had an adventure mode that was pretty okay, not amazing, but I kind of enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a good game. Not mind-blowing, but if you're looking for like a fun, sportsy game from Mario on the Switch, I would say Tennis Aces is probably the best one. Also in the spring of 2018, we got the Splatoon 2 Octo Expansion DLC. And again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this one because I have already done a video on the Splatoon series in general. You should watch that. but the Octo expansion DLC for Splatoon 2 was amazing. So Splatoon 2 at launch, the base game, it is really just more Splatoon 1. And that's totally fine. Like the base game is okay, but it really is a multiplayer game first and foremost. So the single player component is not particularly impressive, and especially when you get to Splatoon 2, when it's basically the same thing as Splatoon 1. You know, there's new plot elements, of course, but the way the campaign is structured is so similar, it's not really as exciting. So Octo Expansion is completely focused on single player. It has a lot more plot elements too, but the stages are much more challenging and much more unique. There's a completely new approach to how you enter stages and how, you know, progression works in this campaign, and it's so refreshing to play it. And the extra challenge is also really cool. Like it's obviously hard, but you know it's fun. It gives you a little more to fight for, because the base game of Splatoon is fairly easy. Like the base campaign is fairly easy and basic, and Octo Expansion just expands on this, well, no pun intended, in so many ways. Like it's just so much more engaging and replayable. I feel like it's so cool. The Octo Expansion DLC is amazing. If you have Splatoon 2, I highly recommend buying this expansion. Or if you have the Switch Online subscription, the expansion is actually included in Switch Online, so you can just play it at no additional cost. That's what I did. Really, really worth it. Highly recommend that. Except the final, like the true final boss, that I cannot beat that. I don't recommend that, as I was way too frustrated. But otherwise, absolutely incredible. And this DLC actually inspired a lot of changes for the campaign in Splatoon 3, which made that a fantastic game as well. So yeah, this was a very good release. Now, before we get on to the last games I'm going to talk about, which are Pokemon Let's Go, I do want to touch on something pretty major that happened in 2018, which is Nintendo Labo. Now, this was never mentioned during the directs because Nintendo sees these products as completely separate from their sort of gaming experiences. These are like more lifestyle oriented experiences, I guess, and they have a different audience. So these are always revealed in separate videos on Twitter and YouTube that are just dropped randomly. But they did release this year. So Nintendo Labo was a series of cardboard accessories for the Switch that let you, assemble certain structures and controllers and things for your games, and then you could play little games with those controllers. So the way this was always reviewed and viewed by people is that it is really more about the building experience than the games themselves, which is really why I didn't get into it myself. The only kit I have actually released in 2019 with the Labo VR kit, but I think it's really interesting to talk about this just because it really showed that even with this sort of basic concept of what the Switch is, like you think of it as these days today, it's like it's just a handheld console with removable controllers. It's still fairly unique, but people look at the Nintendo Switch 2 and think, oh, it's just a bigger Switch, and that Nintendo has lost their innovation and their like creative spirit. And I think what Labo really does is show that Nintendo can have this basic hardware that is easily approachable by developers, and so it's traditional enough for everyone to put their games on it, but they themselves can still have these crazy ideas for what they can do with that hardware and have these really creative and unique experiences that are only possible on the Switch too. Because the thing is, these experiences are never going to appeal to everyone. Like we saw that with the Wii U. Like the Wii, yeah, was massively popular, but after that the fad kind of wore out, no one really cared about this gimmick of the Wii U, even though it was kind of interesting. So why not have this platform that can live for a long time because everyone can make games for it and it's easily approachable, and then provide those crazy, wacky experiences to the people that actually want those experiences? It doesn't have to be this huge commitment as a platform. It's just a thing that you do for a while and then you move on to the next thing, and those experiences are still worth having for the people that care. So I think that's why Labo is so important. There were 3 kits released in 2018. There was the Variety Kit, the Robot Kit, and the Vehicle Kit. And then in 2019, we got the VR kit, which I'll talk about in the 2019 video. But yeah, that was about it for Labo. Finally, we have Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And again, I'm not going to be talking about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate just because I don't have that game and I don't really know what else I can say. But Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were pretty big releases just because they were the first releases on the Nintendo Switch, and it really marked a big transition because throughout the history of Pokemon, these games have always been on Nintendo's handheld consoles, the 3DS, DS, Game Boy Advance. And now with the transition to this hybrid system, there was that big question of like, what is going to happen to Pokemon? Are they finally going to take advantage of this console power that they have now? I mean, it was the logical transition, of course. But I think some people may have wondered, like, maybe Nintendo will have another handheld that actually succeeds at the 3DS, and that's where Pokemon continues. But no, the Switch was successful enough to be Nintendo's main business, and so Pokemon came to the Switch, and it really began this huge transition. Because Pokemon, always being a handheld game, there was a very constrained amount of power you had in that form factor. So these games never looked amazing before. Like they were pretty whatever in terms of what's like they were fine. They looked good for the platforms they were on usually. I think the 3DS games look pretty alright. But they're not on the level of a console. Like the 3DS had a screen with like 240p resolution. It was super low resolution compared to going to the 720p display on the Switch and supporting up to 1080p on the TV. That's a huge jump to make in one generation. And Pokemon Let's Go came out just 1 year after the last 3DS game, so it was a pretty quick transition for such a difference in power. And I feel like that's why, the series has gotten so much criticism over the past few years for not evolving graphically as much as it should. And yeah, I totally get that. I understand the problem, and I talked about it in my video from last week, so I recommend checking that out. But anyway, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were the first games on the Switch, and they were obviously much more limited in scope. This is a sort of reimagining of the first generation of games, Pokemon Gold, no, not Gold, sorry, Red, Blue, and Yellow, and mostly Yellow here. So we have Let's Go Pikachu, which has Pikachu as the main partner, and then Eevee is introduced for the other version, which has Eevee as the main partner instead. But it is very much a retelling of those games, but with a very different approach. So instead of wild battles as they've always been in the series, Pokemon Let's Go takes the catching mechanics of Pokemon Go, which had released a couple of years before. So instead of battling wild Pokemon, your goal is not to catch as many of them as possible, because you get a lot of experience that way. So you're kind of encouraged to catch many more Pokemon because that's how you gain experience a lot of the time. Trainer battles are still here, and you still gain experience that way. But it's often faster to gain experience by catching other Pokemon than it is by battling them. So this aspect of the game is really emphasized in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And it is interesting. So the thing about this sort of mesh of Pokemon Go with a traditional Pokemon game, I think they saw the success of Pokemon Go and thought that maybe that was a way to bridge the gap for people who only played Pokemon Go, because that game appealed to a lot of people that have been out of touch with Pokemon for years. I think everyone in the 90s was really aware of Pokemon when those games came out, but most of those people grew out of it by the mid 2000s or so. And Pokemon Go debuting with just the first generation of Pokemon and being a much more social experience, that brought a lot of people into the fold again. And I think Nintendo saw that, or the Pokemon company saw that as like, maybe this is an entry point that you can use to bring people into the main games. And I think in that sense, it's a very clever idea. You make these simple mechanics available, and it kind of bridges the gap between this and the more traditional games. Things are more simplified, even in the combat. The stats are a little more easier to understand. You can kind of max out all the stats. They don't have EVs in this game. It works a little bit differently. So, it's just a simpler experience overall. And it works well. I think for what it's trying to do, it works fairly well. but it's not a super fun game to go back to for me. I went back to it recently to complete my Pokedex in Pokemon Home, and I didn't really have a great time with it. I don't know. It is really impressive when you look back on these things now, how much Pokemon has tried to stop wasting your time with recent games. Menus have been sped up a lot, like everything has been made much more snappy, and that makes a huge difference because menus can be really slow when you just want to do something and get it done quickly. It just takes so much of your time. It's so frustrating going back to these games now compared to Scarlet and Violet or Sword and Shield. Like they really, really made things way better in the latest games, and I think they don't get enough credit for it because whenever I go back to an old Pokemon game, it really becomes very obvious how flawed those games were in terms of like the performance and everything, and just the general speed. So yeah, I think they're a little frustrating to play now in hindsight, but at the time when they came out in 2018, it made total sense to do it this way. I think it's just it was completely logical. It was this way to bring Pokemon Go fans into the main series, and it also gave fans of the main series like myself a reason to play Pokemon Go because I never played that game when it came out and for a long time afterwards. But now I had a reason to, especially because they introduced this new Pokemon Meltan, which you had to catch in Pokemon Go, and you could transfer it to Pokemon Let's Go. So yeah, it was a good idea. I think it was done decently well. But I think it also kind of did some annoying things. Like in TV mode, the only way you can throw the Pokeball is with motion controls. You can't use a button. And then handheld mode, you'd think, oh, you could just use the catch system from Pokemon Go, right? I mean, it has a touchscreen, you can just swipe and throw the Pokeball. But no, in handheld mode, you have to use the button to throw the Pokeball and you just aim with a gyroscope. That's kind of silly. I don't know why they didn't just implement the same exact catching mechanism that they had in Pokemon Go. I think that would have made the transition that much easier for people coming from Pokemon Go. I don't know, kind of weird. And I also kind of hate how throwing the Pokeball with motion controls works because it can be very unreliable, especially I've always had some issues with the communication from the controller to the console in TV mode because I guess I'm too far away or something. Like the Bluetooth radio on the Switch is not amazing. So there's always a bit too much of a delay to make this catching experience feel really seamless. So yeah, I had some frustrations with it, but it was still a Pokemon game. I think visually, a lot of people like these games because they have a more unique visual style compared to what would come later in the Switch's life, and I totally get that. Like they're more stylized in a way. I don't really know how to explain it, but they feel like they have a bit more personality. I kind of get that. It was also cool to have Mega Evolutions here, even though this game's kind of like in this weird in between spot, or like it didn't really have to adopt any of the mechanics from the other Pokemon games like that. But yeah, Mega Evolutions, I think, are a very easy concept to sell. And yeah, it worked okay here. So overall, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, they were fine games at the time. I remember enjoying them, but going back to them is definitely a little frustrating. And I hope if they ever do another Let's Go game, which I think is getting more and more unlikely every year. Like it feels like it's less likely to happen now than I used to think it was. I hope they refine it a lot more. But overall, it was a fine game. And so was 2018. 2018 was fine. I think, there wasn't a lot of completely new content for the Switch from Nintendo, but some of the ports they brought over were really good. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze was awesome. Bayonetta 2 and 1 were also fantastic games. The Splatoon 2 DLC was amazing. There was a lot of good stuff released in 2018, in my opinion. It's just a lot of it wasn't completely new stuff, but that's okay because Nintendo was trying to create this library of games that you can carry forward forever. The Switch 2 is going to play those games as well. It's backwards compatible, and hopefully, in the future, every generation is going to be compatible with these Switch games. And having these ports makes it so that you have access to all of Nintendo's library on this console very easily. And I think that's good. That's a good thing. It sucks now if you add a Wii U and you have to buy some of these games again. But this was realistically the only way some of these games could be made available today. So I think overall that was a good thing. 2018 may not have been as exciting, but I think just adding Smash Brothers to look forward to at the end of the year kind of gave you something to keep you going the entire time. So that was really cool. Yeah, 2018 was good. I don't think it was the best Switch year, but it was pretty good. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that topic. So if you made it till the end, thank you so much for watching. As per usual, I'm streaming tonight, so please join me there if you have the time. I would love to see you. I am playing The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past for the first time ever. I made it to the Dark World. I am very bad at this game, but I'm trying. I'm trying my best. I'd love to see you there. And I'm also rewatching more Nintendo Directs, which is where some of the footage you saw here came from. So, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Oh, actually, before I go, I forgot to talk about one game, which is Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. It's another Wii U port, but I do want to touch on it just because I actually really like Captain Toad. I think it is a very cute little game. It is a platformer sort of puzzle game, and it's obviously based on this character from Super Mario 3D World and Galaxy 2 and stuff. These are much slower paced, and they have more restrictive movement, but that makes them interesting in their own right. I think this is very different from other Mario platformer games. Like it's nothing like it at all in terms of gameplay. But it's really fun. It's slower paced. It's cute. It's adorable. Captain Toad is one of the cutest Mario characters out there. I really like it. And actually, the game even got, even though this original game is mostly a port of the Wii U version, they added some pretty big DLC to the Switch version in 2019. So that was also very cool. Yeah, I think, there's a lot of new stages in that DLC. And it's just a really fun game. It's a simple puzzle platformer. It's really fun. It has multiplayer, which is really nice. Yeah, I actually do recommend Captain Toad Treasure Tracker as well. It's also cheap on the Switch. I believe it launched at $40 on the Switch. Definitely worth that if you can still find it. Yeah, it's a pretty fun game. And yeah, it really adds a little bit more to the library in 2018. But yeah, now I'm really done. Thanks for watching. Bye.